creatures of our God and King, and every mountain, every valley, everything. Oh, and every good word, every song we could sing. You make everything. You make everything beautiful.
Well, good morning. It's good to see you this morning after being out with COVID last week. You know that terrible thing that is like actually still around and makes you feel horrible. Yeah, but there was a few of us from our staff that got COVID, and I sent a message to somebody last week to check in on them, see how they were doing. Like, hey, how you doing? How's it going? And this was the response that I got from this person. Yeah, you know that sick feeling when you're just like, what day is it, and what planet am I on, and what is happening right now? Yeah, that kind of feeling was going on, but I'm back. I feel quite a bit better. I'd love to shake all of your hands today, too. No, I probably won't do that. Maybe fist bumps, and I'll stay a little bit further away from you, but I am glad to be back. That's not very beautiful, so let's shift gears a little bit, though, and talk about beauty this morning. Here's what we've seen so far in our series. We've talked about how beauty comes from God, it expresses God, and it always points back to God. We've talked about how when God created the world, he created human beings in his image, which in part has to mean that he gave us both a longing for beauty and an ability to create beautiful things, right? He's the creator God, a creator of beauty, and he makes you, and he gives you resources and ability and the power and the strength to be able to create beautiful things in a lot of different forms. Not everybody does it in exactly the same way or appreciates the same kinds of beauties or can create beauty in a way somebody else can, but we all have a contribution to make to beautiful things because of the image of God that's inside of us. We've also talked about how beauty sometimes teaches us and it shows us things that mere words can't do. And we know this because sometimes we get struck by a beauty or a thing of beauty happens or appears in front of us and we're like, wow, God's speaking to me in that thing. For me, one of the ways that this happens is through all of the big birds we have around here, the hawks that we have. For some reason, I've always loved big birds. And there's one, his name is Bob. He actually lives on 70th Street on the light post. And almost every day I come to work, Bob is there, probably getting ready to pounce on a rabbit or something like that. That's kind of carnage. But he's beautiful. And every once in a while, God just lets Bob swoop down when I'm driving by. And I almost get in a car accident because I'm just watching this hawk that is just flying. And it's just a beautiful thing. And it says something to you. It speaks to you. Last week, we pushed back a little bit on this thing that I think we all wrestle with in our culture, which is pushing back on always doing things that are practical, efficient, and frugal. What's easy? What's the easiest way to handle this? What's the most practical way to handle this? And God showed us through the story of this woman anointing Jesus with this very expensive, costly perfume that sometimes we just need to do what's beautiful. We need to take the time, we need to spend the money, we need to put the effort on beautiful things. Now, here's the deal. In the midst of all this talk about beauty that we've been doing, there is still a fundamental question we haven't answered. And I've wondered if some of you have thought about it. You're like, we've done weeks and weeks on this beauty thing, and Jeremy never yet has defined what beauty is. Like, what actually is beauty? And that's what we want to spend time doing today. Is beauty subjective? Is beauty primarily a subjective thing that's up to my personal individual taste, desires, and what I like? Is that what beauty really is? Everybody decides what beauty is for them. Like, for instance, I think this is something of beauty, something that I would greatly enjoy. So look at that. Laid out beautifully, it's presented really well, and it looks really good. And I didn't actually eat breakfast this morning, so I would take that right now, right? But for some of you, you look at this and you're like, it's almost a gag reflex for you because you're like, raw fish and sushi is no good for me. Now, here's something else that some of you think is very, very beautiful. And others of you want to boo, that's not beautiful at all, right? And so is beauty kind of like that? It's just sort of subjective up to your personal taste. When it comes to the arts, consider different forms of art. The same thing happens. Some of you love music, or you love poetry, or you love curling up with a good book and a good story, and others of you are like, That's not really me. I don't really like those things. Those things aren't really that beautiful or moving to me. During the pandemic, these kinds of things went around quite a bit on social media because everybody was at home and online all of the time. So you would see these kinds of things come up. Which vacation spot would you choose? Which house would you live in? What part of the country would you live in? What type of dog would you have? And then they put all the different options up there. I think these options we got for our vacations, it looks like we've got probably Venice is number 3, and Greece is number 2, maybe the Maldives is number 4, I don't know, and a cabin in Colorado for number 1, right? So you pick what looks beautiful to you, what would you enjoy? Is beauty like this? It's just up to your individual personal taste, completely subjective for you. Or is there a standard of beauty? Is there some objective standard that actually tells us what is beautiful? Now, some people would say that beauty is completely subjective. It might be shaped by cultural forces that are out there, but it's a personal inclination. And no one can really say what's beautiful objectively. There's no real standard. It's a personal preference. It's what you feel it to be, and you can have your own feelings about what's beautiful, but in our culture today, never judge anybody else for what they feel is beautiful, what they think about themselves, what they feel about themselves, what they feel beauty is. Is that how beauty is? It's just completely subjective? Well, to take that approach and to believe that beauty is completely up to personal taste and opinion, do you realize that you would have to believe that God does not exist to believe that? That there is no God, therefore there is no standard of what is beautiful? Or if there is a God, we'll give you, okay, there could be a God, but that God must not be concerned with beauty at all. He must have nothing to say about beauty and not care about beauty at all. See, if a God of beauty does exist, if he exists, and he created this world as a beautiful representation of himself, and he created human beings in his image to produce works of art and things that are beautiful, that has to mean that God cares about beauty. He calls humans to co-create those beautiful things with him, and he therefore is the standard of what is beautiful because he created all of this. Do you follow that? Think about maybe another attribute of God to see how this works. When theologians talk about the primary attribute of God that describes all of his character, usually the term we use is holiness. Now, holiness for God means moral purity, but it also sometimes is used to describe the wholeness of God's nature and his character. Now, here's something we realize about holiness, that God is the standard of holiness, absolute moral perfection, right? And in fact, we as human beings who have rebelled against God, we're called that if we're going to have a relationship with God, we got to be what? We've got to be holy like him. Be holy as he is holy. The writer of Hebrews says, without holiness, no one will see the Lord. In other words, there's a standard of holiness, which is God, and we need to be like him in order to have a relationship with him. Which, by the way, is the reason Jesus had to come down, because we were never going to get up there, right? Unless Jesus came, gave up his life, and grants us his righteousness through faith in him to make us come up to the standard of God's holiness. So we get it, that holiness is a standard, and that God is holiness, God is the standard. Well, if God is the standard of holiness, he also is a beautiful God, meaning he's the standard of what is beautiful. And by the way, he's also the standard of love and grace and justice. So in one way, the answer to our question, what is beauty? Well, the answer is God himself. God is the definition of beauty. There's a standard, and it's God, because he created all of this. Maybe think of it this way. Have you ever gone over to somebody's house before and you've played maybe a card game or a board game with them, and in the midst of playing that game, sometimes a discrepancy comes up, right? In the rules of the game. I like, for instance, this game, Rook. My siblings like to play Rook. I grew up playing Rook. Anybody play Rook? You know how to play Rook? Raise your hand if you know Rook out there. Okay. Rook is a card game, to give you the basics of it. There's 4 different suits. There's numbered cards. You're trying to get points. Certain cards are worth points. You're trying to take hands or tricks. You bid on how many points you can get, and you try to set other people. And there's a main suit, and there's a trump suit. There's a Rook, too, which is one of the main cards of the game, of course. Okay, so there's the basics. Now you all know how to play Rook, okay? But here's the deal. If you go over to somebody's house and you play Rook, there are some different ways to play Rook, right? Is the Rook card, this one card with the Rook on it, is it going to be the highest trump or the lowest trump? Who lays the first hand? Does the person that takes the bid from the middle lay the first hand and get to lay whatever they want? Or does the person to the left of the person who took the bid actually lay that thing out? Can you lay trump without trump being broken first, or do you have to lay the suit that is laid, right? These are all discrepancies in the rules. Now, if you've been at somebody's house and you've been playing the game and you didn't decide these before you started, inevitably a conflict is going to ensue when you start playing the game, and you might hear something like this: my house, my rules, right? This is my house. This is the way we play in my house. This is the right way to play. This is the best way to play this game, right? The owner of the place decides. They're the standard. Well, here's the deal. Not only is this world God's house, but he created the game. He came up with all of this, meaning he is the standard of what's holy, of what's good, of what's beautiful, of what justice is. So look, Christians do believe there's a standard of beauty. It's not purely subjective. In the arts, the forms of beauty that we practice, they have an objective standard that drives them and by which they are judged. And that standard is God himself. But I think we can explore this a little bit more by talking about three distinctive characteristics of God's beauty. Three core elements of beauty that we see from the very beginning of creation and is carried throughout the scriptures. So we're going to start in Genesis chapter 1, but I'll have those verses on the screen. Go ahead and turn to Exodus chapter 25 if you've got a Bible or on your device. Page 64 in those Bibles in front of you. We'll get there to Exodus 25 in a minute. Three essential characteristics of beauty. Now here's the deal. I want you to think about for a second, if you were asked this question and you had to write down a definition of beauty, what would your definition be? How would you describe beauty? What would some core elements of beauty be? What are the core components? What would you say? I want to give you three of them here this morning. And I'm going to tell you this. I'm going to spend the most amount of time on the first point, okay? So after I spend most of my time talking on the first point, and you're like, he's still got 2 points left to go. How long are we going to be here? Don't worry. It's going to go fast, the last 2 points, okay? I want to give you a little heads up. What is beauty? The first thing beauty is beauty is goodness. Beauty means goodness. What was God's evaluation about the beautiful creation he made on every single day he made things? He got down, he looked back at his creation, he said, this creation is good. It's a good creation. The Hebrew word for good is tov or tav. You've heard mazel tov before, right? Which means good luck. This is that Hebrew word good. That's what God declared his creation to be. And on day 6, after he had created everything, and he looks back and he evaluates the whole of creation, in Genesis chapter 1 and verse 31, we read this: God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. It was very good, meaning it was right. It was pleasing. It was just the way that God wanted it to be because it was crafted through the word and the power of the God of all power and all wisdom and all holiness and all beauty. And so his creation showed him. It showed the very nature of God himself. So when we talk about goodness, when we talk about tov and things that are beautiful, they have to be good. We're talking actually about three things that we can further define. Goodness means, first of all, moral goodness. In other words, goodness means purity, holiness. It meets the standard. It's consistent with God's nature of perfection. God never creates anything that is immoral or sinful or takes you down that path. It comes from the nature of God itself. Therefore, goodness has to mean moral purity. But the second thing goodness means is functional goodness, meaning it fulfills the purpose for which it was created. It's functionally excellent. It's not dysfunctional or subpar. You know, in our world today, we have whole markets, websites, and stores full of knockoff items where you have an original item, but then somebody's like, no, I'm going to make a knockoff item of this. You could go to wish.com if you want to, and you could find any genuine article at a much less quality there and less expensive. Some of you get stuck in this sometimes. You're like, you know, I want AirPods, and I need to have AirPods, but I don't want to spend $200. I found these ones on Amazon, and I'm sure they're the same thing. They're $30. They're going to be really good. They look almost exactly the same. And then you get those AirPods, those earpods, or whatever they might be called, right, or spelled differently, and you're like, now I know why these were $30, right? Like the Bluetooth won't connect, the sound quality is not very good, it goes in and out. You got taken because it's a knockoff. They're functionally not very good. They functionally miss the mark. Well, not God's creation. God's creation fulfilled the purpose for which it was created to a T. In Genesis chapter 1, when God looks back at his creation and he evaluates it and he says it's good, do you know this is the primary thing God is meaning about the creation? that it fulfilled the purpose for which he created it. When he creates and evaluates the creation, he says, this does exactly what I created it to do. And what did God create everything that he created to do? What were the purposes for which he created this world and you and trees and flowers and animals and the waters and the light and the sky and all those things? There's 3 reasons he created them, 3 functions they had. 1, they were to reflect his creativity and beauty. When God creates, he's showing us who he is. The heavens declare the glory of God. The sky above proclaims his handiwork. Day after day, they pour forth speech. The heavens speak to us of the very nature of God himself. The second functional goodness that the creation has is that it provides order and structure. If you go back and you read Genesis 1 very carefully, you start to see a rhythm to the words that are there. He created light and darkness. He created the moon, the sun, and the stars. He created plants to be able to feed people that were pleasing. He created days, and he created a week, and months, and a year. So he created cycles and systems and structure. And so God's creation is intending to bring order out of chaos. Remember, the darkness covered the face of the deep, and God speaks and he starts moving and putting all this order and structure into place so that it would be a place, thirdly, that promoted life and enjoyment. God wanted to provide an environment that could make life flourish. That's why he says, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. These are the functions for which God created the world, and it was good, and therefore it was beautiful. Moral goodness, functional goodness, and thirdly, goodness means aesthetic goodness. It means everything that God created was created with excellence. It was pleasing. It was of high quality. It was expert craftsmanship. It looked and it felt beautiful. In fact, if you and I could have been in the garden in that original creation with Adam and Eve, when we walked around the garden and we saw everything that God created, we would have had the distinct feeling that God was there. That his presence you could almost visibly see, you could touch, you could smell, and everything that God created because it was so perfect and it was absolutely beautiful. See, God's original creation was morally good because it came from him. It fulfilled the purpose for which he made it, and it was beautiful. It looked amazing. In Genesis chapter 2 and verse 9, for instance, we read this. The Lord God made all kinds of trees to grow out of the ground, trees that were pleasing to the eye and were good for food. They looked really good. They looked beautiful, and they put inside the human beings that saw them a desire, like, I want to eat that. I want to have that. I want to have that thing. I think that would be really good. Because God didn't make so-so stuff. There was no microwaves in the Garden of Eden. I know some of you rely upon your microwave for your very subsistence in this life, but that's not a part of the original creation. It was all garden to table is what it was. It was all organic stuff that God created from the very beginning. Excellently composed food. So that if you would have looked at it, you would have been like, I desire that thing. It's so pleasing and it's beautiful to the eyes. Because God's creation was morally, functionally, and aesthetically good. Now, if that is there in Genesis from the very beginning, those 3 aspects of goodness, we also see this carried throughout the story of Scripture. And I'm just going to show you one other place in Exodus chapter 25 where we see the same thing. This is where God tells the children of Israel to create a place of worship for him. These are his people that he has chosen out of slavery in Egypt. He's taken Moses, their leader, up onto a mountaintop to give Moses all of these instructions about making a tabernacle, a place of worship. And it ends up being like 6 chapters long in the book of Exodus with all sorts of details about the dimensions, the materials, the furniture, the composition of the tabernacle. There's a lot that's there. And then God says this to Moses in Exodus 25 and verse 9. Make this tabernacle and all its furnishings exactly like the pattern that I'll show you. And then God begins to give the pattern about the Ark of the Covenant, the table, the lampstand, and then he reminds Moses again in verse 40, see that you make them according to the pattern that I've shown you on the mountain. Do you know for Moses, it wasn't just, hey, Moses, just do whatever you want. We need a place where I'm going to come down and dwell among the people, so you guys just figure it out and do what you want to do. No, God says there's a standard, there's a pattern. And I'm going to give you very specific instructions about what the pattern is. That's moral goodness. That's God's word, his truth, shaping what is beautiful, shaping our understanding of what God wants and desires. Here's the pattern, now carry it out. Now, an interesting thing about the pattern that God gives Moses, back in Exodus chapter 20, when God was giving Moses what's called the 10 Commandments, One of the things he says in those 10 commandments is don't make any graven images. Don't make idols. Don't bow down. Don't worship them. Be very careful about crafting images. And yet when God gives the directions for the tabernacle, he says, but there are some images I do want you to create. I want you to create images of cherubs that are going to be on the top of the Ark of the Covenant with their wings spread out, facing each other, and those images touching each other. So you might be like, oh, what it is? No images or images? Should we do images? Should we not do images? I thought we weren't supposed to do this. But now God's saying all these ornate images are supposed to be a part of his place of worship. Is it images or no images? And you know what the answer is? It's whatever God said it's supposed to be, right? Because he's the standard. We listen to him. He's the moral standard of what is good, what is right. We follow his pattern. And he gives lots of other instructions about the furniture and the furnishings. Some things are right, and some things are wrong. What determines what's right and what's wrong? God's word. What God has told us is right and what is wrong. And then what is the purpose of this place of worship? What's the purpose of all these pieces of furniture? We'll jump back up one verse, verse 8. God said to Moses, have them make a sanctuary for me, and I will dwell among them. The function of the tabernacle was to provide access to God, a place where God would come down and would meet with his people. So the tabernacle would be good, and therefore it would be beautiful insofar as it accomplished that purpose. But then notice this, what God says is morally good, this pattern, and functionally good, a place for me to dwell with my people, was also intended to be aesthetically good. God wanted it to be stunning. There's no other way around it. He wanted it to be absolutely attractive. Jump back up to verse 1 where all this started. The Lord said to Moses, tell the Israelites to bring me an offering. You are to receive the offering for me from everyone whose heart prompts them to give. And here's what I want them to bring for this place of worship. Bring from them gold, silver, bronze, blue purple, and scarlet yarn, and fine linen, goat hair, ram skins dyed red, and another type of durable leather, acacia wood, olive oil, spices for the anointing oil, and for the fragrant incense, onyx stones, and other gems to be mounted on the ephod and the breastpiece. Do you notice that when God tells Moses what this place is going to do, what it's going to look like, and the offering the people need to bring to put it together, he doesn't say to Moses, hey, just have the people go find some sticks and some tree branches, we'll slap some mud together, we'll put it together, it'll all be good. No, what does he say? I want gold, and there's going to be silver, and there's going to be fine linen that's going to be brought in, and I want you to do some work to get all of these materials together. And then he goes on later to give instructions about skilled workers and about ornate architecture and elaborate designs. And then he says this about a guy by the name of Bezalel. He says, well, we've got all that stuff brought in. There's going to be a lot of work that's going to need to be done. And I need a foreman. I need a leader who has the ability to put all this stuff together. And so he says this about Bezalel in Exodus chapter 31. He says, I have filled this guy Bezalel with the Spirit of God. We saw this a few weeks ago. This is the first time anybody has ever said to be dwelt with the Spirit of God in the entire Bible. And who was it? It was an artist to make ornate, beautiful things in God's temple, right? And I'm going to fill him with wisdom and understanding and knowledge and all kinds of skills so he can make artistic designs, to work in gold, silver, bronze, to cut and set stones, to work in wood, to engage in all different kinds of crafts. I'm going to give him the ability to make beautiful things, elaborate things, ornate things, aesthetically good things. Now look, if God gave this ability to Bezalel, that has to mean he cares about things looking good according to the standard that he has set, the standard of beauty. But we can push this further. Think a little bit more then about what this must mean. It must mean also that within each of these crafts that God calls out here, that he wants to be a part of his place of worship, things like woodworking and metalworking and stonemasonry and clothing, that there must be within each of those areas design principles that separates average work from excellent work. Okay craftsmanship from really good craftsmanship. Apparently there can be good woodworking and so-so woodworking. Quality stonemasonry and so-so stonemasonry. And I think you kind of know this intuitively. You may not be an expert on landscape design, but I got a project for you today. Okay, after you leave this place, go around your neighborhood. If you're not in a neighborhood, pick somebody's neighborhood and walk around in the neighborhood for a little while and evaluate their landscape that they have in front of their house. Don't tell them that you're doing this. This might not be very nice, but evaluate their landscape. And what you're going to find inevitably as you go through that, you're going to be like, oh, that's like done. That's okay. Like, that's decent. I kind of like that, but it's kind of a little bit overgrown here. And oh, look at this one. They didn't even mow their grass, or I don't know, lots of weeds going on. I'm not doing so good. And they're going to go to this one. You'll be like, wow, look at that. Look at how it's laid out. Look at how it's organized. Look at how it is kept. Look at how that flows, and it just leads your eye to go up to this place, and they've got a focal point right there. And you know, when I think about this house, they've planted this in such a way that different things bloom all throughout the year, like there was order and design to this. Now, you might not know a lot about landscape design, but just by observing, you do this intuitively. You know what fits certain design principles and what is therefore beautiful just by looking and evaluating those things. And the more gifted you are in an area and the more you practice a particular area of art, the more you tell over time what's good and what's not so good. Classic art is like this. You know, classic art is not something that a lot of people know very well. I know throughout this series I've been putting different pictures up there, and every time I put them up there, some of you are like, I have no idea what's going on right now. Like, I don't know. He's going to talk, I'll be like, yeah, I see what you're talking about. And you're like, you don't know. You don't really know, right? So it's something that a lot of people, they don't actually know that much about. But just by looking at and taking a little bit of time on something of beauty like that, a classic work of art, you can tell, like, okay, I can see a little bit about what's going on here. That's amazing to me that somebody could put that together. And over time, the more time you learned about it, the more time you spent on it, the more you would become familiar what is good art, what looks like good art, and therefore what is beautiful. Now, one more thought on this, if you indulge me for just a second, then you can maybe explore a little bit more later. While God is the standard of moral goodness for all forms of art, what's good and what's true and what's morally pure, each form of art has functional and aesthetic principles that are inherent to that form of art. Meaning things like painting, music, graphic arts, photography, interior design, all those things should conform to God's standard of moral goodness. But at the same time, God has allowed for some development of the functional and aesthetic principles of art forms to be developed by artists over time. So take all of those areas, again, landscape design, interior design, painting. There are principles for those design elements that have been developed over time, which makes sense because we are people that are created in the image of God. And God has delegated some level of creativity and beauty and imagination to the people that He has created. All of that flows from Him, but He has allowed human artists to develop particular principles for each art form. Now, culture and history also influences that over time. The fall in our sinfulness is an influence on those things as well. And there is some level of personal taste, particularly of the group of artists that set those design principles for those areas of art. I think that this is why we sometimes feel like art and beauty is subjective. Do you know why you feel like art and beauty is subjective? Because some of it is. Some of it is subjective. The part that's been developed by human artists and human taste. It hopefully, again, comes from God's moral, functional, and aesthetic goodness, but it also is human. And so as artists, we're always doing the work of coming back to God, coming back to His goodness, working on our crafts, learning and growing. If you're an artist, you know that this is true. There is a striving as an artist. There is work, and there's frustration sometimes, and there is wrestling as an artist to create things of beauty. There's a pursuit of goodness and beauty even when we often fall short of those things. Because God is the good. He is the good that we all strive for, morally, functionally, and aesthetically beautiful. You know, that's what God wanted for His tabernacle. He employed every kind of art form through the hands of artists to create a place of immense beauty. In fact, the tabernacle turned out to be so good and therefore so beautiful, it caused King David to cry out in one of his psalms this, in Psalm 27 and verse 4. David said, "One thing I've asked from the Lord, this only do I seek, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, just to gaze on the beauty of the Lord and to seek Him in His temple." There's a lot of things that David asked for in his life, but here he's saying there's one ultimate thing. There's one thing that is most important in this life. God, this is the one thing I'm asking you, that I could just see your beauty, that I could just sit in your beauty. This is amazing from David, isn't it? Not that I would know more things, not that I would know more Bible verses. That's important. That's really good to know, right? For sure. Not that I would know more of your truth, but that I would just sit in your presence and be able to gaze on your beauty. Because you know what David knew? He knew that's what he needed more than anything else. To see and to be moved by the beauty of God. Why must beauty be defined by goodness? Moral goodness, functional goodness, and aesthetic goodness? Because that's who God is. And that's what God values. And that's what David longed to see in the temple. Expressions then of beauty that are morally, functionally, and aesthetically good, they flow from God. And they point us back to God, just like they did in the temple. And just like they do when we gather here on a Sunday morning together as followers of Jesus and we sing songs to him. And we listen to his word together. And we look at other image bearers of God sitting next to us, seeking to walk with God and struggling through the difficulties of life. When we give an encouraging word to each other. All of that beauty flows from God and points back to him. Beauty is goodness that comes from God and points back to him. But beauty is also truth. Beauty is goodness and beauty is truth. This is the second core element of beauty. Did you know that for something to be beautiful, truly beautiful, it must also be true? And in one sense, that's saying the same thing as it being morally good. God is morally good and he's also true. So for something to be beautiful, it also has to be true. Yes and amen, if you follow that. But to push this further, what we mean by truth is that the beauty that we are seeing, it has to reveal something to us about God, about the nature of the world, about reality, about humans, about relationships. It has to reveal something that is in line with the truth. So what is true? Do you know what's true? What is true are things like that God created this world with great beauty. The beauty of the natural world and people, the beauty of nature, the beauty of history, the beauty of how God works, but also not only the beauty of things, but the reality of sin and its effect in this world, the reality of suffering and pain and longing and struggle and difficulty. And then thirdly, the power of redemption, that Jesus Christ comes in to live the life we couldn't live and die the death we couldn't die so we could have a relationship with our Creator. Jesus shows us sacrifice, and he shows us grace and forgiveness and love. And it is the truth that there is hope in an eternity where everything will be made perfect forever when Jesus Christ returns. Essentially, the truth that we are trying to communicate through works of beauty, through works of art, is the big story that we often talk about here. It's the big story of creation, fall, redemption, and ultimate restoration, all through Jesus. So look, get this. Beauty that conforms to truth is not just always happy and nice. It might be, but it also shows the reality of living in this fallen world. It wrestles with pain. It gives a glimmer of hope in the midst of sorrow. It shows the humanity of people, all of those things that are true. It shows the full story of life and reality in many, many different forms. Now, when it comes to truth and beauty being things that are true, there's often two errors as human beings that we make. And one of them is a Christian error that is often made. And one of the Christian errors we make with something being true and therefore beautiful is that we often simplify the truth down to the bare minimum. So this might not be a popular opinion with some of you. I'm not sure there has been a good Christian movie that has been produced yet. A truly beautiful Christian movie. We're getting closer. We're getting better. There's been some things that have come out, and it just feels like, oh, we're getting a little bit closer to that. But you know what the problem often is with Christian art in these forms is that it's way too simplistic. It's just too obtuse. It's too in your face. With a megaphone, it blasts things, and you watch and you're like, I don't know if I've ever met a person like that. I don't think people are really like that. I don't think it's that obvious. I don't think it's always that much in your face. We don't use subtlety very well a lot of times in Christian art either. And therefore, I just don't know that it's always rings true to people when we watch it, and therefore it may not quite meet the standard of beauty. So that's one error that can make, too simplistic. It doesn't really ring true. There's too much caricaturization that's going on there. The other error that can be made is when our art is profane, when it is void of God, when it seeks to shock without a purpose, when it's banal, right? Those are two errors that can be made. Either it's just completely profane or it's too simplistic. Neither one of those rings true to the reality of how things really are, and therefore it fails to be beautiful. Instead, let me give you an example of just one example of something that can be beautiful. There was an artist by the name of Thomas Cole who started a group of artists called the Hudson River School. And he painted a series of paintings from 1833 to 1836 called The Course of Empire. He did a couple of different series of paintings like this. One had to do with the journey of life, but this was about the course of empire. And he was trying to speak some truths about what an empire is like. The paintings actually start on the bottom left, and they move up around the top and back around to the right. And what Cole was trying to do with this was, first of all, to show what he called the savage state. That's the bottom left. The world that's really unrefined and in its natural beauty, and humans are just kind of breaking into that world and trying to live in peace and harmony with that world. The next painting is called the Pastoral State, or that state where there's a lot of harmony and work. There's some formation and development, but very much human beings are living in conjunction with the land. The middle painting, the key painting there, is called the Consummation of Empire. When man and industry they've flourished, they've done really well, but in this state they start to dominate other men. They suppress other peoples, and the result is pride and gluttony and arrogance. Pleasures, unwanted pleasures there at the height of the empire, which he says is always going to be followed by destruction, where the empire will be destroyed, and eventually desolation, where the land in essence reclaims its rightful place, right? Now look, if you look at these paintings, and if you took some time outside of here to really stare at them and watch them, there's a lot of little things that are going on with the people that he has included in these paintings. But in essence, what Cole was trying to speak to us and say to us is that every empire will fall. And often with great power comes pride, gluttony, and arrogance, which just anticipates our downfall. There's a lot of truth there in the midst of the destruction and the desolation, and yet there's beauty there as well, if we're willing to receive it, right? But again, art that is false, art that's profane, that's untrue, that's vile, is ugly. And it was untruth, after all, that ruined the world in the first place, right? When the serpent came to Adam and Eve and said, "Did God really say?" He deceived, he questioned untruth and ugly. Instead, this is what beauty truly looks like. In Philippians chapter 4, we're told this: whatever is true, whatever's noble, whatever's right and pure and lovely and admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about these things. Produce such things. Admire such things. They are beautiful. Beauty is goodness. Beauty is truth. And lastly, beauty is awe-inspiring. Beauty is awe-inspiring. Now, the first two elements of beauty are more intrinsic to the nature of the thing itself, right? Goodness and truth. But this final thing is what this work of art, this thing of beauty, produces in people. It produces awe. Something that is truly beautiful will cause you to stop. And it will maybe cause you to drop one of these, right? Just to speak other certain people's language, right? Oh my goodness. Have you ever had this expression on your face before when some beauty has caught you and you're just like, oh, wow, that is unbelievable. Beauty will move you. Sometimes in ways you can't even grasp or articulate. That's when you know something's really beautiful, because you can't even get any words out. Sometimes it'll hit you out of nowhere. For those of you that truly love someone and you've decided to commit your life to them and do life together, you know there's a lot of ups and downs in that relationship, especially if you start a family and you do your life together. There's a lot of hard times. But there's also these moments sometimes with that person that you have chosen to do your life with where they catch you off guard and you just see them doing something, saying something, or even moving in some way, and you're just like, dude, you are, maybe not dude, that was bad. That was a bad way to say it. Woman, no, I don't know. You're beautiful. Don't the person that you love, sometimes they just catch you and you didn't expect, you're like, oh my goodness, you are so beautiful. You are so amazing. You are so incredible. And it just catches you in that way sometimes. Maybe that happens with your spouse. That could happen with a rainbow too. About a week and a half ago, we had a rainbow. Did you go outside to look at it? Look, here's the deal. Make a pact with me. Every time there's a rainbow, go outside and look at it. They don't come around super often. It's amazing. Go out there and just look at that rainbow for a little while. And if you're like me, be like, how is this even happening? I know I learned about this in science class, but I don't remember. How is this even possible for that thing to be in the sky like that? You know why? Because God decided to do that. And it's beautiful, and it's amazing. I remember one time I was taken by surprise by a thing of beauty that God just wanted to say something to me. It happened when Michelle and I were in Ohio, and we were serving a church there on the campus of Miami University, where we lived before here. And it was a place that, like, we ended up loving. God did amazing things there, but we had, like, 3, 4, 5 years of just difficult soil, man. It was just hard. There was a lot of hard things. There was a lot of difficult things. There was a lot of just difficulty there. And one day when I was coming out of our office, I saw this in the parking lot. This is one of our entrances to the church. And if you notice, there's a concrete driveway, there's a parking lot, with a gigantic concrete wall and a concrete walkway and a wrought iron fence and a brick wall. There's just a lot of hard surfaces all over the place. And in the midst of that hard surfaces, in the concrete, was growing a petunia. That's a petunia plant. And I was like, how does that even happen? Is there even soil down there? I don't even know if there's any soil in this very, very, very hard place. And yet out of all of that hard places, somehow a seed got down in the ground somehow, and God brought something beautiful out of it. And in that moment, God was saying to me, Jeremy, keep going. I'm doing something here. I'm working here. I know it's really hard. I know the soil feels really hard. I know it doesn't seem like sometimes there's a lot of progress, but I can make something beautiful out of anything. And something like that, I imagine, has happened to you before too, where God just showed you something of beauty that you couldn't even exactly point into words. You didn't even understand how it got there or how it happened, but God was saying, I am beautiful, and I am with you, and come gaze upon my beauty. Sometimes it catches you by surprise, but you know what? You can also go looking for it. This is what David did in Psalm 27 and verse 4. God, I'm looking for you. I need your beauty. I need to see you. I need to be arrested by you. I need to be moved by you. I need to stand in awe of who you are. I just want to gaze on your beauty. See, David wanted the source of awe-inspiring beauty, God himself. The God who is goodness, truth, and all things beautiful. Look, there are a lot of things that you and I give our time and our attention to. One question you might ask yourself is this: are any of these things awe-inspiring? We're on our phones a lot, man. Watch a lot of shows, a lot of movies. You read a lot of things. You do a lot of stuff. Have you made room for beauty? For things that are truly beautiful and awe-inspiring? Those things that are good, true, and wow. You know what's crazy is that the most beautiful things in life are free. We just need to stop and enjoy them. God is near. His creation surrounds us. The people he has created with such beauty are right beside of us. Great works of art are so accessible. Music is right there. We can't always control our awe or make ourselves feel wonder, but you can look for it. You can take time for it. Like David, we can gaze upon the beauty of the Lord and let him move us with the greatness of who he is. And then artists that are out there, and all of you are in some way, we can pursue our forms of art and make our contribution to beauty with goodness, with moral, functional, and aesthetic goodness, in a way that is consistent with truth and the reality of this world, while we strive to produce those things which produce awe, which inspire awe in others, because it all comes from God. It expresses God, and it always points back to him. Would you pray with me?